this year, 2025, Undoing Racism Day, is the 15th year in a row that we've had Undoing Racism Day. Even when we had the pandemic and we had to be on Zoom, we met and had our Undoing Racism Day event. And as many of you know, the event changes year to year depending on what's important to talk about, what needs to be addressed, what are people concerned about. So a number of you in this room have been to more than one of the Undoing Racism Day breakfasts through the years since 2011. Do we have anybody who's here for the first time? Can you raise your hand? All right, good. That's good because that means we're still growing. And anybody who's been here 2 to 5 times? Yeah, look at that. Anybody who's been here, 6 to 10 times? Yeah, a number. And then how about all 15? I guess that's me. Me and my husband. And I know a number of our board members too. So I want to welcome you all to our effort, which we have our mission and our vision, but overall it's really celebrating becoming the beloved community, which is a process. It's a long-term process that we faithfully attend to. And we're doing the work, and we keep going, and it's good to be with all of you here today. Just to move on, a couple of items. The person who will be giving our opening prayer today, instead of it being Reverend Livingston, he had injured his back, is Reverend Jay Gardner, who is ably filling in for him today, and so we're grateful for him. And just a couple of notes. You'll see this on the table. This is the QR code for the program. There's a PDF of the program on our website. So if you scan the QR code, it'll bring you to the Community Breakfast website, and then you can click on the button. It's on there that says this is the program for today's event. There are index cards on everybody's tables, and there are pens. There are also pens that were given to us last year by Wisfis Bank, which was, we now have a board member, Eric Murchison, who is from Wisfis Bank. So those pens can be souvenirs of today's event if you want. You can have a pen. But the index cards. So once we have our moderator and our panelists up here, they'll begin a bit of discussion and then invite the moderator, Reverend Carolyn, will invite you, if you have questions, write it on the index card and then just hold it up, and some of our board members will circulate and bring the question up to Reverend Carolyn for you, so that this way you're really participating in the panel discussion. So we're really tending to what questions people have and what concerns people have. Okay. I think I'll stop for a second so that Reverend Jay Gardner, who is the Zones of Peace Coordinator at Interfaith Philadelphia and also on the Religious Leaders Council, will open our event with the opening prayer. Then I'll just come up to introduce our moderator and panelists and welcome them up to the stage. Thanks.
Wow, so beautiful. So exciting and grateful to be here. And yes, Reverend Edward, he sends his regrets as he was really trying to get here and then called me last night. He said it's not going to happen. And so he asked me if I would come and step in, and I'm so honored to be able to be here. I would come on behalf of Interfaith Philadelphia and the Religious Leaders Council. We've been working for over 20 years to bring communities together. In particular, I'm working with the Zones of Peace, which is an initiative of the Religious Leaders Council, and we're seeking to recognize and honor groups around the area who are doing works toward peace. And then you ask, well, what does that mean? And it can be a number of things: children's programs, diapers for the babies, adult care, conversations among each other, helping people with housing, and gun violence and other aspects of violence. So many things, poverty, so many things contribute to lack of peace, and we want to have a community that is toward peace. So thank you for allowing us to participate in this day, because this is a day that indeed moves toward peace. Let us pray. Gracious and merciful God, creator of all, sustainer of all, you are the most gracious and the most merciful. In gratitude, we worship you. In our finitude, we cry out for help. You know all things. You see all things. And even in your hand is the day of judgment. We ask you to lead us. Lead us to a way of peace. Lead us to the way of community. Lead us to the way of love. Give us the heart to desire the best for others. Teach us not only to love the divine, but to recognize the divine in others so that we might love others as we love ourselves. Eternal God, you created, called us, and claimed us, and call us as your own, your people, your children. Help us that we might invite others, always be inviting others, that we indeed might be the community of love, the beloved community, the community that reflects your image fully in this world. This is our prayer as your people. Amen.
Before I introduce the panel and our moderator and welcome them up to the stage, I just really want to acknowledge and welcome the students from Radnor Middle School. If you could raise your hands. And Radnor High School also, and their staff that came also from Radnor Middle School and Radnor High School. Thank you so much for being here. I'm hoping that you're having a rich conversation at your tables, and even as you're thinking about the questions that you're going to ask, that being together with all of us is going to be fruitful. So our panelist, our moderator is Reverend Carolyn Cavanis. Reverend Carolyn is the pastor of the Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia. And in the program, and really on our website, there's also a press release on our website. It shows that this community breakfast, this Undoing Racism Day, it really started in 2010 when a bunch of us got together at the rededication of the Bishop Richard Allen Park in 2010, and we said we missed the Radnor Township Unity Breakfast that ran for 8 years and then stopped for economic reasons. And we decided, let's see if we could get together and have a pay-your-own-way breakfast. And so I just want to recognize Chris Kowalski, too. Are you here, Chris? There he is, Chris Kowalski from Villanova University, who really helped us to launch this idea and have the breakfast at campus in the Villanova room, and even helped us also to have the breakfast here at the inn while that whole building was being renovated, so it was unavailable for us. So Reverend Carolyn, being the pastor of the Mother Bethel AME Church, is now our moderator this year. Our very first keynote speaker in 2011 was Reverend Tyler, who was the pastor at that time and is now the immediate past pastor. So we have like a nice history connected to the Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia, and Richard Allen, who founded that church and who walked in Radnor Township in 1784, preached at the Methodist Church in Garrett Hill in 1784, so we have like an interesting tie there. So we really welcome Reverend Carolyn to being our moderator today. In addition, Reverend Carolyn is the Vice President of the Community Breakfast Collaborative too. So we welcome her as our moderator. And then our panelists are Keir Bradford-Grey, who is an attorney and was a public defender when she was a panelist a number of years ago, I want to say 2017. So I feel a little sentimental because we've watched her grow personally and professionally. So I thank her for being a panelist. And then we have State Rep, Honorable Rep Napoleon Nelson from the 154th District to be a panelist today. And our final panelist, just because of alphabetical order, is Craig Whelan, PhD, who is a professor of public administration at Villanova University, and he also happens to be my husband. And so I signed him up. He just finished a significant administrative role for the past 18 years at Villanova, and so he's taken a bit of a sabbatical, and so he was available. So I'll welcome you all up to the stage, and we'll get your microphones set and then get started.
All righty. Good morning, everyone, and deeply honored, and thank you, Ann, for that introduction. I am cold, so please don't think something's wrong. It's me, and so I'm putting a scarf on. But want to again, just honor the work of the community breakfast and bringing us together from our various backgrounds and creeds and understandings, but all towards being the manifestation of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's mantra and core of beingness, that of being the beloved community. This is not, to me, a happenstance that we gather together on September the 17th, Constitution Day, and also in light of me being down the street at Mother Bethel on 6th and Lombard, where we know that today we are awaiting potentially receiving from this current administration when we talk about truth and talk about history and talking about undoing history, when we are called to do history and to tell truth and also to honor every part, certainly, of the fabric of American history. And so I think it was good for me to be here and for us to be here together as we uplift and think about our topic for our discussion with our, certainly our distinctive guest of panelists, the United States Constitution and its implications for democracy. To get us started, I'm going to ask if each of our panelists could just say hello to us, to greet us, and also tell us a little bit about yourself and how are you wrestling and what does the Constitution mean to you? So I'll start with Representative Nelson.
Good morning. Again, Napoleon Nelson. I am a state rep in Montgomery County. We have the 154th legislative district. I'm pretty sure that doesn't mean anything to any of you. I'm Montgomery County in Cheltenham, Jenkintown, and Springfield. I am also currently honored to be the chair of Pennsylvania's Legislative Black Caucus. The Constitution is, it's a really amazing time to think about that document and to think about the time when we were dedicating ourselves to this kind of, I'll call it experiment because that's what we always seem to do, but dedicating ourselves to this sort of a community that that would be bound by core values, and those values being largely freedoms. I still, hold the Constitution in very, very high regard, not just because, we think about and take oaths around that, but also because it reminds me of how much we have gone through as a nation. It reminds me of how much we have seen in this world that informed even that document, 200 and probably 40-something years ago at this point. And I think an awful lot about our shared commitments to each other. That's what that document really stands for, is a shared commitment to each other. And we push it at times, and we'll talk about that, we'll get into it, but I still believe deeply in it, and still believe deeply in what should, could, and always has been a nation that is kind of bound together by thought and belief.
Very good. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bradford-Grey, and I just want to thank you for even inviting me back and to speak with you, as well as us communing together to really talk about this complex subject. It is very complex, and I applaud everyone who's willing to put themselves in a space to talk about it deeply and entrenchedly. For me, the Constitution means everything, right? I have understood the Constitution from such a lens that I understand that there are so many more rights that are dishonored than honored. Mm-hmm. We have a document that gives us all the opportunity for liberty. Liberty means the ability to be free, to be who you are, to go for what you want, whether you want the moon or the stars or the trees or the sand. Whatever that is, you should have an unencumbered path to doing that. And I, unfortunately, have not seen that for everyone. Now, we have an amazing value proposition, as Rep. Nelson said. We have a social contract for everyone who is born on this soil or has attained some kind of citizenship, that we are to have these certain rights ascribed to us. But that doesn't always practically play out. And we've got to understand why. Where are the barriers towards actually honoring those words that are in that document that we all pledge to and that we all say that we want? Where are those words for people that are trying to achieve it? And so as a public defender, I've been a public defender most of my career, either as a practicing attorney or as a leader. I have always sought to invite more people into protections of the Constitution, and that has always been a very uphill battle. So right now, I'm a civil rights lawyer, and I am trying to help people understand what rights they have, because actually people know what the law says, but in practice, they get violated every day, and many people walk away dealing with it in a frustrated manner, and that causes them not to participate as fully as we would like them to. So when we get more deeper into conversation, I'd like to talk about more solutions with that, but that's really where I start. So thank you for inviting me.
So I think of the Constitution in connection to the Declaration of Independence. I don't think you can appreciate the Constitution unless you also appreciate the importance of that declaration. And I always think of the Declaration and the Constitution more as a promise at times than it is an actual reality in the moment we live. So when those core values that the state representative mentioned, those are the guiding things that we have to rely upon. And I point to the preamble of the Constitution. You all have this handout here, this document from the National Constitution Center that they provided, and the preamble is repeating the promise both stated in the Declaration and one that we can live by today. And that's those core values that we're trying to establish: a just society, a fair society, a society of tranquility, if you will, order, and that's the rule of law that promises that, but it's an imperfect process. The Constitution itself had to be changed through amendments to ensure greater freedom, especially for the former slaves, to be given citizenship and to be given due process and equal protection and the right to vote. So it wasn't a perfect document in the beginning, and it isn't now. So to me, it's a promise, and we always have to keep going back to those core values and asking, are we living up to what these values mean to us and how we need to change and deal with the current crisis of the day. And sometimes our leaders rise to the occasion, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're the problem. Well, one of the institutions is the problem. And so as we talk today, I think we'll explore some of these issues in our contemporary context. But for me, it's a promise, and it's for us to help make sure we live up to it.
So just to provide some context, this document signed, if you will, September 17th, 1787, right? This is 11 years post July the 4th, 1776. Here we are on the heels of the semi-quincentennial. Can anybody say that real fast and slow? The 250th in the birthplace of, right, democracy, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania by extension. You know, we're Philadelphia too, even here on the main line. And so we fast forward, and to think about that the Constitution written in a way to address, because feeling that there were some shortcomings with the first document. And that I like, Craig, to talk about this being a promise, an ideal. But what happens as to what's the why? Why is there the disconnect? The ideals, right, what it stands for, what it represents, but what causes the barriers, right? How is it that we're not, that, you know, we talk about bound by core values? What is it, think about sitting in the room and creating and coming together, but then you think it, but then we're not able to do it. Mm-hmm. So what do we feel, I mean, to really kind of wrestle with, what's in the way? What's the elephant in the room?
I would say the way we value people. That's in the room, because honestly, power and control is a dominant factor. And who's in power and control are those who have the right, in their minds, those who have the right to be in power and control because their lives are valued at a higher mark. And so if you don't value everyone in the same way, if I don't look at you and say, hey, you've got so much potential to help enhance my life, and if you don't look at me that way, then you're going to see me as unworthy as to fulfill some of those very promises that you gave to me, because I haven't contributed as much to society as you may have. And I'm not talking about you guys generally. Obviously, I'm talking about powerful and powerless. Love seems to be something that is powerless, right? When I say we should all lead with love, that means for some reason I may have no power. And so those two things don't go hand in hand. And I think that's the hard part for us to struggle with. Love and power, where love allows us to do just by everyone because we see each other from a love proposition. I love you as a person. And so if you want to succeed or whatever you want to do, I'm going to see you as a whole person. But if I see this as where does my power lie, I'm going to look at those who I value more and give them all the promises that we've made, because power has to remain in a bubble in order for me to keep it. And so I would think that just looking at each other and not valuing us based on the same level, right? If we're leading based on love, sure, we'll value everyone the same. But if we're leading based on our power ego, being power hungry, then certain people are going to have more value than others. And therefore, trying to give everybody those same promises is not going to be as important.
Any other?
Yeah, I agree and almost think that it's kind of this base human instinct, animal instinct to both secure and protect your stuff and to some degree dominate others. There's kind of this natural basis instinct of domination and securing your stuff. And your stuff might actually be somebody else's stuff that you covet, right? And these are things that, I mean, there's biblical, understanding of this. There is, I mean, this is nothing new. This isn't anything that is within the last 249 years. I think the beauty of the nation, the beauty of a document of a sovereign nation being bound by an idea as opposed to just a border, formed by an idea as opposed to just a border, is that we're intentionally trying to put, kind of some real intention and our better instincts on paper. And it was always aspirational. It was always, this is who we want to be. It's a pursuit of life, liberty, right? And so we understand in the document that it is meant to change, it is meant to be living, but it is also meant to call us to the nation that we envision having seen other nations. The government we envision having seen other governments. A land that wants to be free, having seen what it is to not. That was the theory. However, when we get too far from the theory of better angels and allow ourselves as individuals and then as a mass to think more about those basest instincts of, all right, listen, theory is all well and good, but what about me? And what about my needs? Then all of a sudden you'll see those differences. I remember thinking about this an awful lot in 2024 elections, and there'd be focus groups out there. I remember very specifically there was a podcast that was listening to and talking with a group in, I think it was Wisconsin, listen, I'm going to try not to make most of this political, right, Democrat, Republican, or anything like that, but they were listening to, I think, might have been a Democratic National Convention. They were listening to Kamala Harris's speech, and they were talking with a mother who had two young daughters, and her daughters were in like their 20, 21, 22, 23, and the interviewer was asking this woman if she heard anything that she liked, and she said, kind of no, not really. He said, well, what about, you've got young girls who are thinking about, trying to, start a family. How is that going? I mean, it's really important to them. They're trying to figure that out. They're trying to start their career. They want, maybe want to buy a house. They want, to figure out what in the world they're going to do as they're now maturing into their mid-20s. And this is critical for their kids. And they said, well, Kamala Harris talked about housing. She talked about, obviously, protecting, family planning rights and women's rights in their health care. And this woman, though, was in her mid-50s, presumably. And she said, but I don't need any of those things. And I said, whoa, just the notion that, well, but what about me, was a very defining factor. We all have to wrestle with that. And we all have to wrestle with what it is when our nation becomes, but what about me? We're talking right now, and we'll get into, maybe we will, maybe we won't, political violence and this, that, and the other. And I think that there's always, I hate it when we look at those things and say, well, this is a horrible, vile person who committed this act. I'm like, because then you're missing the desperation that would drive someone to commit a horrible, violent, heinous act. We need to make sure that we're thinking about what it is about our current implementation of a nation that is leading us away from our better angels, leading us away from our stated morals, and leading us to this point where we're now thinking, but what about me? And what about those basest ideas? I went too long there.
Oh, that's fine. Just to tie into it with like referencing the First Amendment, which protects our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion, our freedom of press, freedom to assemble and petition our government for the redress of our grievances, to paraphrase the amendment. So we think of that broadly, and it protects all of us, and it should, but then we get into the debate about what kind of speech can be protected and not protected, or what is an appropriate religious practice and which isn't necessarily, that might need to be regulated and controlled. And so it's in the application of these provisions in the Constitution and the laws passed based on the Constitution where we see the challenge of different perspectives and interests being played out by citizens and trying to figure out what's appropriate speech. Should hate speech be prohibited? Well, currently it isn't. But if it's specific to an individual or group and presents an intimidation and threat specifically, well, that can be illegal. But you can say really horrible things about other people and groups and that's protected by the First Amendment. And so that creates a real challenge for all of us, is to figure out what do we want to continue to allow in terms of speech or religious practice, or the ways we assemble and petition our government. How far can a protest go, a march go? And if you look at our history, we have at times been quite repressive. And then at other times, like if you think of our civil rights movement and Martin Luther King's movement and the way he practiced nonviolent civil disobedience, to raise the issue of the wrongness of certain laws. Well, we take pride in that now, but I tell you what, in 1955 and 58 and 60, it wasn't broadly popular in the country. We look back now and say it was necessary trouble, but to paraphrase John Lewis. But that's where you see the real dynamic of interest playing out. And I think for the most part, we've done pretty well as a country to adjust over time and make the place a better place for everyone. We've expanded what it means to be American and free. But at moments we have pushback, and I think we're in that kind of era right now where we're having a pushback on the breadth of reform that we've experienced over the last, say, 50 years.
Can I just say something? I totally agree with you, and I think the pushback is about power, right? Because equity means I love everyone equally enough to say that you deserve to be a human being with basic freedoms and rights. And it doesn't matter what it would mean take for me, because it shouldn't take for me. But when you're only thinking about your power and in your positioning, then that's where you have the discrepancy in how you lead and what you do, like with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was preaching about loving every fellow citizen. And for that, people saw that as losing power. And so I think when we have this discrepancy between love and power, that imbalance is always going to tilt to where the powerful are. And I have a feeling that we don't really see our power in numbers because we can't. Oppression makes us not believe we have more power than we really do to upset the apple cart. And I wish that in moments when Martin Luther King were speaking those things that I'm sure everyone believed. Everyone believed that peace, love, everyone has the right to enjoy things. But when he's preaching it, they go with the power to condemn him. And his own people who he's fighting for kill him. We have to think about where that comes from. We're dealing with that right now, where we see very good leaders capitulating to power versus love and respect for everyone. And that's the history moments that we need to pay attention to, because we need to say, what happened then? What's happening now? Because backlash is a part of the process. But quite frankly, if we didn't learn from it as we're still alive in the civil rights era, most of us are. I know I have grays that have died, but they're still alive.
Look up.
We should understand the playbook now in order to stop it at our doorstep.
And something I just want to, the language of love, respect, honor, these abstract, to me are pointing around moral compassing. And that also becomes a place of great contention, right? Because morality, faith, when we think about the founding fathers, right? The country being built upon Judeo-Christian principles. Where's the disconnect, right? Because we're pulling from somewhere, and then we know that there's to be separation, right, of church and state, right? But love could make the argument that that's a church thing, that's a religious faith, right, offspring. How does that come into this equation? How does that is there a place for that?
She looked at you. Come on.
So I'm just sitting here thinking, I think that's, the fifth estate, right? We're in this interesting space now where politics and the moral compass that theoretically we get from our faith, from those kind of founding kind of inspiration, has been separated quite a bit. And to be honest with you, I think it was separated because those two worlds merged. And those two worlds merged, I could argue those two worlds merged in, Catholic churches around the nation some years ago as coalitions were being built, as we began to have, evangelicals become a very political movement. And this is, again, from my leftist lens. There are probably, even in my community, I could walk through my community and be generally welcomed unless I walk into certain Catholic churches. And then I get this sense of, what are you doing here in this? And I'm Christian. I'm the son of a pastor. And I don't want to put, it feels like I did, and I probably did. I shouldn't put blame there as much as attribution of how we think about the place that we are and how we think about the ability for religion and politics, the ability for religion and policy, perhaps. I'll be a little bit cleaner. It's gotten us in this interesting space right now. And I can imagine, and I know through talking with folks of faith on the Democratic side, on the left side, that they're angry about how, ordained individuals are fighting over which God are we talking about. And the God we're talking about seems to be different based on almost how those policies are showing up in the pulpit. Mm-hmm. It's gotten us into this really interesting space where that moral compass becomes, right? That moral compass becomes, hey, let me talk about your politics, as opposed to let me talk about, how you are feeling saved, how you are thinking about your place in a universe, how you are thinking about your soul. It's now, I can judge your soul based on where you stand on political position. And then I don't know where we go to for moral compass anymore. Now the moral compass becomes, well, who's leading on that political position, because they've already, it's this really, this is what happens when you get on a stage and somebody just asks a question and you just want to answer, because it's a really hard spot. Yeah. And we've got really amazing, pastors that I go to who, talk about where we are now in this place and are just more angry at the fact that things are being done in the name of religion and duty and a God and a belief system, and it doesn't reflect really a shared vision of that belief system anymore. Yeah.
Sorry.
That was the end of my political career. Please.
I think he covered it. I think he covered it all. Okay. Honestly, I don't even know where to jump in with that one, but great job.
I'll just make a quick comment. There's a sensibility now where we tend to talk about our enemies in political debates, and there wasn't a time too long ago where there were vigorous debates, but people were not, from both parties, weren't sort of attacking one another as being enemies of one another. And I think when you begin to normalize, and we even use the language of war, we're in a culture war, right? And we're being invaded by refugees and immigrants, and using that language of war to talk about all these range of issues creates a dynamic in our thinking that makes it hard to think of ourselves as all of one citizenry, of having so much in common together, and an ability through relying on our core values and principles to kind of talk through what would be the solutions to these problems of a lot of refugees, a lot of asylum seekers, a lot of people seeking a better life, so they come here and try to find it in the United States, which is we've had that for a couple of centuries we've been doing that. So I think it's in the words that we use as leaders particularly, and as people in the public life who advocate on behalf of certain causes, it's that comfort in talking in the language of war that makes it hard to then draw upon moral values and are more like love.
Yeah.
I mean, think of the language of love as opposed to the language of war.
Right.
How would you think about refugees? Would you think about them as they're breaking the law, so they have to be deported, as opposed to giving them an opportunity to go through the asylum process? There's a whole legal process set up, and they can have a representative, and they can make their case and have a recommendation. Then an asylum judge makes a decision about the merit. Just let the process work. Instead of saying they broke the law, they came in, I'll cross the border, they're out. Right? So I think that is an issue we have to really think about in terms of how we talk about these issues and the use of the languages of war and battle and invasion and so on.
Thank you for that. Just a little housekeeping. I failed to begin. If you do have any questions, if you'd be so kind to place on the note card and wave your hand, one of the community breakfast board members would be happy to pick up your card and bring it here to certainly as we continue in this very enlightening and thoughtful, but also we're being intentional as we want to concretize, right? We want to walk away with solutions. So I appreciate Craig to say the words that we are using, right? The language. Even I would argue that we need to have a familiarity of the document itself. Right? That was one of the reasons for Constitution Day, that there would be a mandate that schools and educational institutions would teach Constitution, right? Would teach this document, right? That there is an active level of familiarity, that we understand the document and how we should be going about even in its manifestation, in its embodiment. With that question, and this I want to give this to the lawyer. How can we protect the document that is supposed to protect democracy? And even if you have some insights about this constitutional law and what's happening in that area of the law.
Yeah. So I would think, did you finish?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Thank you for the question, wherever it came from, because that's one of the things that I keep trying to make people aware of. The document itself is just the document that doesn't need to be protected or destroyed. It's the people who carry out the document's wishes or mandates. Those are the people who need to be either, one, I wish they would lead from a center of love. And I know when I say that, people think, oh, that's weak, right? I mean, love, if you're leading from love, you're a weak leader. No, you're not. You're more powerful than you ever thought, because power is infinite when you share it with others. But we talk about power, and I really want to keep this structure of power, leading from love. So when you lead from power, it doesn't allow you to fully implement the things that are in this document for everyone, because that's too much equity to disperse amongst everyone, and therefore power gets diluted in certain people's minds. And so I don't think it's a document that needs to be protected. We need to demand its protections amongst all of us. And so when I see civil rights being violated day after day after day, and I should just give you a quick brief story. I come from a family who I've unfortunately had to watch their civil rights be violated at every turn. My father, with the healthcare system, we lost him early because he didn't have the civil right to be treated equal amongst those systems that were very complex, and no leader, no political leader, made it possible for people like my family to fight against these major systems that could show us the things that they would claim that they love us, and by giving us access to health care shows me that you're leading with love. right? But instead you're led with power because some people said it was too expensive and you're spending my money on them, and therefore my power is connected with my wealth. That is the difference there. And you can see it in its application of equity in the major areas: healthcare, education, economics, housing, and criminal justice. When you look at how those 5 areas are dispersed, you will see who leads with power in mind and who leads with love. So I say the document itself doesn't need to be protected, but the notions behind it for everyone needs to be advanced. And that is by the people that claim, when they stand up here and say, I want to be this because God called me to be in this role because it's a purpose. Is your purpose because you love all of us? Or is your purpose because you want to have a power-driven mission in terms of making sure that you and your people are safe? I just think that power and love dynamic doesn't seem to play on the same field when it comes to politics.
So the current administration, President Trump, is relying on statutes that give the president some opportunity to declare emergencies. An economic emergency, an invasion creates an emergency under the Alien and Sedition Act. And so by relying on these statutes that are rarely used, and have only been used at times when there are a real, like a crisis like the Great Depression, or the Civil War, or World War II. He's declaring emergencies in order to be able to suspend due process, to suspend people's rights to be heard in court, to be represented by a lawyer. And so you can read it in the papers and every day and online, you know, how people are being deported without access to a lawyer or their opportunities to defend themselves, which laws provide. So I think one of the challenges we face right now is determining the legitimacy of those decisions, those executive orders and those acts by the current president using emergency powers. And the courts are looking at that right now. And so far, he's losing in the courts. Now, eventually those cases will get to the Supreme Court. And that Supreme Court has a huge responsibility to decide, is he using the emergency powers within the meaning of the statutes and the Constitution? The tariffs, all the tariffs that he's imposing. That law that supports that was written very narrowly to provide an opportunity, like in a one-on-one with one other country imposing tariffs on us, the president could respond to that without having to go to Congress and have Congress pass new tariffs, because Congress has the power under the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, to impose duties, imposts, and fees and such like tariffs. That's Congress's responsibility to vote for that, and then the president implements it. Well, the president's using a statute now that's, in a way, justifying these tariffs against every country in the world. That's the real question. Does the statute really support that? Again, the courts are going to decide that. They have ruled no so far. So it's going to the Supreme Court. So we're in for a big year coming up with these Supreme Court decisions and deciding how the power of the president using these particular statutes to declare emergencies actually justifies an expansion of his authority, expansion of his presidential actions.
So I'm not a constitutional scholar. I'm not even a lawyer or anything like that. I would say for the high school folks, if you're like still paying a little bit of attention to this conversation, great on you. Be a judge, because that's one of those spaces where the Constitution.
Be a lawyer first.
Still is. Well, the path to being. We should talk to. I would love to think that the next 250 years of this nation, and the next, I mean, again, it was 238 years of the Constitution, haven't focused on the one amendment that speaks most to me and should speak most to who we are as a nation. That's the 9th Amendment of the Constitution that says we didn't get it all. There are other rights that we didn't document that are still rights to the people. it's really played like no role whatsoever in how the law has been decided and how courts have thought about and implemented the Constitution. But I argue it's the most important one. We didn't get it all. There's more stuff out there. You have, as Americans, you have, as we all identify, other basic rights that aren't enumerated. So when we think about, is housing a right? Maybe, but let's argue that based on that 9th Amendment. Should there be a universal right for public education? Should there be, like, all of these things, let's argue that based on the 9th Amendment. And we look at other, legal doctrine to figure out, 14th Amendment right now is like, that's the big one.
That's a big one.
We're trying to cram into the 14th Amendment that realistically to me is like, well, no, the 9th Amendment ought to get that. Which effectively says there are others. Once we try and name them, there's still going to be others, right? And so I think the protection of the document and the protection of the Constitution, remember, it's kind of as we started, it's values, it's how we think about our union with each other. It will continue to live on, but we got to really recognize that it's never going to be perfect. And we got to get out of our kind of anal retentive, the achievers who get to the point where they're actually helping to define the document, to get to that point in policy or in your legal practice where you get to actually have some say on the interpretation of the document. You're probably going to be the sort of person who's going to want to write everything down. But there's some stuff that we just didn't write down that's still a right that we all get to share. That's the beauty of the thing. And hopefully the next 250 years will really, be a 9th Amendment generation for this nation.
I like that.
I like the next, I have to jump in there because I'm over here itching, right? Let me say this, and I greatly understand what you're saying, but as a person who has really, truly studied the Constitution and has been a constitutional connoisseur throughout my career, we have a heck of a lot of rights.
Yes.
Heck of a lot of rights. And guess what grabs mostly all of them? Equal protection. And we don't use it far enough. We have gotten in our state constitution the right to be free from discrimination based on your race, sexual orientation, gender, or religion. We don't use it enough. We leave those on the books, right? Because we don't understand how practically it's applied to many of us, because many of us have yet to see what that looks like in terms of an equity standpoint. So when you're administering justice, there's a lot in here to administer justice. Now, I know people say, but we need our voting rights to be delineated. Yes, because people in power want to remove that from an equal protection. When they're talking about education, equal protection says we should have access to education. Now, they said, we didn't say how good that education should be. We just said access to it. But then you don't love me. Because if you're telling me that I don't get to be treated the same way in terms of an opportunity to compete, then how is it that you are administering justice through this document? And I'm talking about those who practice law. I'm talking about those who administer the rule of law through their seats in a judicial position that is supposed to be administering justice that's not coming from a core of morality. Because if you're not coming from that, you're going to maneuver this document. So it's not what's not in a document. It's the lack of interpretation as it applies to everyone, and it's the lack of the will to give everyone that equal protection, which is the foundational operative of this document. Equal protection applies to everything I do. Everything I do. And I fight for equal protection. I'm going to give you one quick example. Schools. I'm getting calls from parents whose kids are being racially targeted. And the schools are treating it as bullying. Well, why is that? Don't I have a right to be protected based on what is happening to me? Because this is something based on things that I cannot change. And I am being targeted for that. But when I see schools getting funding stripped away from them because they have people who are making people feel inferior in their school, I don't see the equal protection there. Because you don't look at me from a place of love. You look at me as a person that you have to deal with in some semblance of society. But when I see you protect, from a federal government standpoint, people who say, I don't feel comfortable because people are protesting things that are against my country or my nation. And so therefore, my rights are being infringed because I don't feel comfortable at Harvard or Penn because there are too many people protesting Palestine. I don't feel comfortable. And the federal government steps in and says, you know what? You're not protecting all these kids. I'm going to take away your funding. But then when I hear kids and mothers saying, my daughter's called the N-word, my daughter's doing this, and I don't see any action, then I know that it's not this document that's the problem. It's the people who are interpreting who deserves this document's protections.
People. So what I would like to do
That's my problem.
is we have amazing questions, and we have 18 minutes, and we want to honor.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. One of the pieces I want to, and we've lifted this, but want to acknowledge, I think it's important, and when we talk about acknowledging the humanity of each other and who's in the room and what our thoughts, even if it's maybe a bit of a push to do it, it's important to do that we practice that which we would like for how our community to function. So one is around, there seems to be a conflict between the two elements that this country values the most, and we've touched on this around money and individual worth. How do you think we can reconcile? To that end, another, which I believe connects, it seems like the government practice of allocating funds contributes to the idea that if we put dollars here, we cannot put them there, zero sum. What will it take to dismantle this belief and make distribution more equitable as a citizen? So we're talking about the economy, if you will. Any thoughts on how do we reconcile money, values, individual worth?
Yeah, so how we spend money oftentimes reflects our values, right? So we always say a budget is really a moral document. I think what we're seeing right now is a bit of a shift in using any dollars to be kind of a weapon or a cudgel that can be allocated or withheld based on something that has nothing to do with what the dollars are being used for. Again, I think how our government operates is very separate from how the Constitution has helped to define our nation. Some of this stuff is just this administration. Some of this is just even almost a populist movement in the nation, right? So let's not all assume it's just kind of good or bad based on MAGA. This isn't just a Make America Great, but it's really understanding what it is to have kind of a very populist administration, and we don't have too many of those in America's history. So how we govern and how we allocate dollars based on populist perspective as opposed to purely capitalist or largely capitalist perspectives or largely kind of almost socialist perspectives, those all differ from how a government is currently administered and implemented. I'm not as concerned about what that portends to the future of the country, because that could change again, with court cases, that could change, after the next, federal election. That could change certainly after the election after that, with the new presidential administration. So, that's really more of I'll call it a temporary implementation of government.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay. How could we, around Amendment 14, and we lifted this up, all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States, of the state wherein they reside. How do you feel that they are trying to take this away?
I mean, I feel this is something that, again, should rattle our social contract with with America. We have been understood that this is a right given to anyone born here. To take it away for your political purpose is absurd. And I just don't think that fundamental rights that we have for freedoms should just be snatched away. That's just something, and I'm not so sure that it can. I don't want to be hyperbolic about something because someone's putting that in the atmosphere, distracting me from the real issues, right? I mean, if this Supreme Court does something like that, we're going to have a real problem. And we're going to have Congress broaden the Supreme Court, because we obviously can't trust the Supreme Court to do the will of our social construction versus their political agenda. So I don't think everything that is put in the news or written on a, what is it called? The presidential executive order. First of all, executive orders can't override laws. They can't. You can write it. It can make a great soundbite. You can talk about it to get people off other important issues, but it's not going to override law. And I cannot see, and I'm being optimistic here, a Supreme Court that's baked in an understanding of laws that are there, not an interpretation of the law. It's
Right.
plain English. It's just not something that I, at this moment, can see that will change.
It would be stunning if a court dominated by a majority of the court professing to be originalist and reading a constitution would say that the 14th Amendment isn't plain and simply understood as
Pretty much.
birthright
that
citizenship.
It needs interpretation.
Yes, exactly.
And so with that, to move us to practice and concretizing, one of the pieces that shines through is one is we have to know the document, right? So how do we? So we have them available, okay? The second is the question around with that. How do we stay informed, right? We talked about, just hit this, sound bites or the power of the weight. In actuality, an executive order can't override a law,
Right.
okay? We could also say, what are the news sources that you're listening to, right? Who is informing, right? What can we do in light of this culture, right? In light of this, in the air of fear, language, language of war, disinformation. What are other ways in which, how do we ward off, Craig?
Yeah, I'll go first. So there are some very reliable sources that you can go to the internet and look at. The U.S. Constitution Center provides a lot of information about the history and development of the Constitution and the importance of the rule of law. The University of California, Santa Barbara has a website called the American Presidency Project, and they document all the executive orders issued by presidents going back to the founding, George Washington. They have all kinds of information there, all the data presented simply in a kind of plain language, nonpartisan way. It's just a lot of good facts, and it helps you understand very quickly how President Trump is acting in very unique and aggressive ways, shall I say, and out of the step of what many other presidents have done. And they do that then just presenting what he's done, And so what I would recommend is finding websites that you can trust like that. I think university websites are a great resource. That's why I mentioned the UC Santa Barbara one. There are others that you could go to, and the Constitution Center. Those are good sources.
And I would say we got to make it fun, right? Make it exciting for people that want to civically engage. Civic engagement should not be an option. It should be something that it's ingrained. And the fact that we can't get schools to do civic engagement anymore, or civics generally, is a problem. I remember watching a documentary on Thurgood Marshall, and when we had separate schools, they truly taught civic engagement in African American, or schools that were for black only. And those kids who were in the 40s had the benefit of understanding how to be real participants and understanding how government functions and works. And even me, as a kid that grew up in the 70s, I had cartoons telling me how government works. I'm just a bill sitting on, those things they're subliminally soaked in. And so it made me more interesting. If I'm telling people to read that, boo, that is boring and it's hard to understand. But if I am interpreting that in a way that I know gets to the excitement and the passion of people, then I'm likely to have people that are more curious about it.
Yeah.
And with that, are there other spaces or groups or allies that also could be ways in which that we, as those present here, can connect with, that you might be a part of, that might be good places to also, in working this out and living this out? What is that, if we could put some meat on the bones that way?
League of Women Voters.
League of Women Voters,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Well, they need an influx of diversity of age.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
All of these organizations, if we mention them, will need an influx of young folks,
Yes, we need some young folks.
NAACPs.
I would say this. I know that there are groups that are trying to make things plain, that are inviting people into space, not to become legal scholars or lawyers, but to be informed generally about these things. Like, you can Google things these days. But I think it just starts with opening the doors of school systems in a lot of ways. I know that I was a part, when I was in Montgomery County Public Defender Office, we would go to schools and we would teach age-appropriate civics. And it was great because those kids had no idea, how laws govern everything we do, even the mattress you sleep on. So it was a really fascinating exercise. And I just don't understand that. That is such a fundamental importance in our society, and why that's not pushed at the school level, at school board levels. I'm flabbergasted with that. I don't get it.
So I will say this, as a former school board member, and my wife is hoping that I'll be able to jump on a call with students at her school now because she's a principal. I know that they're just trying to get, English, math, reading and comprehension skills. Hopefully you can, again, use the document to do it, but I don't think that, I'll kind of pull it up a little bit. The document doesn't need everyone to know what's in it for it to work. The Constitution doesn't need 300 million U.S. constitutional scholars for it to govern how the United States is operating. The people who are making decisions, both the judges, the lawyers, the elected officials, we're all good enough or approximate enough to constitutional scholars to know when we're doing right, when we're doing wrong, and where we should be moving. The challenge in it all, and the goal for everyone, is if I'll say, and I'll get to kind of the underlying question of, if you want to get involved, what do we do? How do we make sure this document is protected? We make sure the document is protected by making sure that the underlying values that founded the nation are protected, which means that we have to make sure that those influences that keep people away from the underlying values of love and togetherness and unity are stamped out. If there are people who feel a level of desperation and feel like their government has been ignoring them for so long that I don't care what the Constitution says, I don't care about saving democracy, I care about trying to provide for me and my community, because in 2 hours from here in rural Pennsylvania, it's going to look like a very different place. And the levels of poverty, or the levels of, we talk an awful lot about hospital deserts and things like that, and where you can't find health care, and we're worried about what that's going to look like, especially not too far from here in kind of Delaware County. We've got 5 counties in Pennsylvania that are hospital deserts, and they're nowhere close to here. If you've ever been to Forest County, that's a hospital desert. That's a healthcare desert. So I think part of what we always have to be mindful of is, hey, by the way, how is the government actually doing? Are we actually being effective at providing for the rights and the needs of individuals? If housing is completely unattainable, if a college education is way too expensive and doesn't provide any reward, if all of these things are happening, then no, people aren't going to care about, well, but let's make sure we love on each other. There will be a level of desperation that will call for change. The same nation that would elect an Obama, in 2008, and by the way, in 2008, like the Democratic Party had the Dakotas, like the senators from the Dakotas were Democrats in 2008. To then Trump in 2016, like people want change. People want something to be different. And so our job, if you want to get involved, if you want to help protect the document that founds the nation, is we need to make sure that the nation is able to come together in a real and meaningful way, hold me accountable and hold elected officials accountable for saying, hey, did your budget actually do the moral stuff that it's supposed to do? Because if it doesn't, then the erosion of that collective fabric of caring for each other, that's our fault. And we've been eating into that collective fabric for an awful long time with our politics, and it's gotten us to this point. So yes, get involved in your civic organizations. Get involved in whatever organizations will help you meet and learn about somebody new. This is a wonderfully diverse place. Have those conversations about how we're different and how we're similar. Young man, go to a university that you'll be comfortable, but will also pull you out of your comfort zone a little bit and help you introduce you to new ideas, concepts. And what you'll find is that we actually are relatively similar. We have so much in common. And we need to make sure that not only do we fixate on our similarities and fixate also on those things that make us, just an amazingly blended community, but that we're actually meeting each other's needs.
I want to also add as thank you for that, Rep, another resource, the Rendell Center for Civic Education.
Yes.
Okay, as another resource.
Plenty of places. You don't need to be an expert.
No. And I think also in our learning and our connecting, it's also how do we be that which we know is lacking.
That's right.
Correct.
Right? How do we, till we don't accept we are all from the same dust, there's a battle to fight.
Preach.
At different aspects. How can we get there? What does leading with love look like? And I think we have definitely, I think that's a great takeaway. And how does that look for we as individuals? How does that look like for the different organizations that we espouse to and are part of? How does it look when we might have power and privilege, but we recognize the vulnerable? How do we hold what equity versus equality? And we all have probably seen, the little guy, is on a little thing, and then they bring up enough boxes, right, so he can be, so that everyone can see over the fence and say, oh wow, I can get over there too.
Right.
What are nonviolent strategies and habits, attitudes, perspectives that we can help to show, right, and to help to propagate and to embody? What is it that we can be doing in these challenging times? One thing I didn't, would lift up, how do we write op-eds, right? How do we advocate? How do we wear T-shirts that propagate, right, that are putting out there, okay? So what can we do as individuals, family, community do? And these are challenging times. What do we say to our students, our young people, to each other? about what it means to build a future that is grounded and based on inequity and love. So that, I think, would be a nice kind of parting if each of us could, to sound this out. What are you commissioning us to do?
And I'll just because I'll keep it quick, because I just did that in the last rant that I had. Just be a champion for your neighbor, and hope that you live next to someone who will be a champion for you.
I would say this, it's going to be a very difficult thing to really put ourselves in positions where we are willing to give up some of our comfort for others. I love so many people. I don't like everyone, but I do love a lot of people where I don't want to see you suffer. But what does that look like for me if I'm watching you suffer and I'm comfortable? Am I willing to give up some of my comfortability for you? That's leading with love. And so when you're saying to yourself, yeah, that's their fight, not mine, that's not the purpose of being in a loving community who loves one another enough to want to see everyone have the equity they deserve. I feel like in history, only a few people have ever really fought for the things that we truly say we want. There's a small percentage of our entire community that has only been doing that. We have to have more people, far more people than we've had, be involved in this quest for equity, because equity includes you being a little bit more uncomfortable. When we have leaders who attain power and they're not willing to leave their discomfort when they see some people hurting and fighting for equity, then that should be a huge sign to us that that person's not leading from a position of love. And we should be willing to say something to those folks in a way that allows them to understand that we did not want this from you. And if we can't do that, then we're never going to do anything else. So that's me. And I know I'm talking a little asterisk about the who, but I think we might know. But I'm just going to say that.
2 suggestions. One, and it's difficult at times, is to talk to people with whom you don't agree. And do it in a way that focuses on information, core values, love of one another, but try to correct their view, if you will, if you think it's wrong. And they'll challenge you, and you need to be open to that and to listen. And by doing that, you're empowering yourself to be a citizen. The second thing is, look to our leaders, find those that you think are saying what you think is important about our country and our rule of law, and support them. Support them just with when you have your conversations with people, or if you can, give donations, work on campaigns, endorse if you like certain shows because people speak the way you want them to speak, support them. And when confronted by people who are angry and saying harsh things and maybe using hateful language, tell them that's not appropriate. Right? That we're all citizens, right? And so it takes courage to do that, but fundamentally, you're a citizen of the United States. You have the rights to do this and to participate in public life. And you go to a town hall and people get a little emotional there and they're speaking back and forth. That's democracy. Right? That's what it's supposed to be. It's not a clean and sanitized process. It doesn't have to be violent. It doesn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be that way. But you have to have that courage as a citizen to sort of be willing to talk to other people.
And I would also like to offer, even if I'm being called out of my comfort zone, to ask, how can I show up for you?
Yes.
Right? For me not to assume this is how, it might be, I'm grateful that I want you to be there for me, but you might want to stay home. And these are other ways in which you can send me encouraging text. That was just a very, okay. Another piece I would add is for institutions who are doing the both and. So when I think about where I'm blessed to serve, that is a both and institution. So Richard Allen, when he walks out of St. George's 1787, a couple of months from this document being signed, November, the third Sunday of November 1787, is because of racial discrimination, and he's given the opportunity in 1791 to purchase a piece of property down the street from the first White House. And I always say to the congregation, that is not a, they allowed Richard Allen to be down the street from the first White House. That was just not, I want that spot, okay? I even think about if you've ever been to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, that was King's first congregation he was called to. And I recall going there last year, I was like, oh, I want to go see Dexter Avenue. So I was, I thought it was going to be this big place, and I walked past it about 5 times. It was this little, okay? But next door is the courthouse, and then within a rock throw is Alabama. Okay, is the Alabama Assembly, okay? That is where the Capitol is. So there is no way that Martin Luther King, with his briefcase and his children, okay, there's no way that he could not talk and be a champion for justice because of what was down the street. Okay, so to think about location and where we are, that even being together this morning, that is not. So back to Allen, there's no way in the world that you can be on the same street as the first White House. You have to live in both of these worlds. So yes, he's preaching, but he's also being a place of helping to secure and to bring to life and to provide what Black Philadelphia, because that's the edge of Black Philadelphia. Philadelphia stopped right there in the historic Ward 7, right there. And that was where he was allowed to build this church, okay? So how do we support institutions who are having to contend in these two worlds, but he still believed in patriotism? Right? He still, there was an American flag posted at his crypt until maybe 30 years ago, right? So to think about that, as much as this country may not be living up to its ideals, he's still believing it, right? We still believe in it. We still believe this aspirational document, that it can't come to fruition. But it's going to take some hard work. It's taking the heart is in the matter, right? Our coming together, having to support, having to show each other, right? How do we actively listen? How do we, that's where that's misinformation. That's not what it says. That's not my lived experience. Yeah. I missed out. I didn't get that opportunity. So that's why you can't get something out of me that I don't know. Right? And so for us to think about, to also be a support to institutions who are living and having to help bridge these gaps while the Supreme Court is figuring it out, we still have people who are showing up at our doors who need to eat.
That's correct.
Right, with SNAP benefits. If you haven't seen recently what's happening to SNAP, you have to now show that you have to have 40 hours of work.
There's enough of them people.
80
of work.
Okay, and I've got 3 children, and what does that look like? So for institutions who are having to, fight to get resources, but then have people knocking at the door, how can we support? How can we lend an ear? How can we lend our voice? How does our privilege come into play? Right? It's not always what you know, it's who you know, who's the messenger, who's signing, okay? And so I want to end with how the Constitution starts, that preamble. In fact, I think we should say it together. Can we? I think that's a good idea.
I'll share a book with you. There you go.
I can't even.
All right. I think we should pull out our little books.
You put my font.
Okay. I'm looking at okay. I believe it should be, okay. And we want to give a shout out again to all of our young people. Let's give our young people a hand. And okay. Let's try to do this together.
All right.
What page is it on in the red book?
27. Page 27.
Page 27? Okay. Page 27.
You have it up.
Okay. Ready?
How much we go?
Set, go.
We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America.
It's all there.
That sounds.
It's all there.
Let's give a hand for our amazing panelists.
Thank you so much
you.
for amazing moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Whelan. Thank you, Rep. Nelson. Thank you, Attorney Bradford-Grey. And we want to say thank you. So give yourselves a hand.
Yes, thank you.
And we want to thank again our president of the community breakfast, Ann Minicozy. Let's give her a hand for her tremendous leadership. And to all of our board members, will all the members of the board please stand? All the board members, if you wouldn't mind standing. We were very grateful for your leadership. We want to thank the Inn at Villanova, so let's give the team here for their tremendous hospitality. We want to thank Mainline TV for covering us, and they've recorded this. And so let us leave together united to be and to become the beloved community through civic engagement, that these conversations have been rich, something to think about, something for us to carry on, and also looking forward to coming together. And please be in touch with us. And it's been an honor to moderate and to be with you this morning. And so let us go forth in love. Let us go forth in peace. Let us go forth, for we are the people. Amen.